Hello everyone, so Kim here with Native Lady Book Warrior, and right now I am going to be wrapping up my February reads and also January. I just realized today I didn't share with you all what I read for January. It wasn't anything big. I actually carried a lot of reads over into February, but I'm really excited to share it all with you. And yeah, so let's get started, everyone. Okay, so welcome, Tewa Village. Welcome. If you don't know who I am, my name is Kim, and this is my channel, Native Lady Book Warrior. Okay, first, I'm going to be sharing my reads for January. I only completed, I think, 2 books. So let's get started. Okay, for my first book that I actually reread this book in January, and I read Heartberries by Therese Marie Myatt. And this book was pretty incredible. I don't know if I wrapped this up also. I think I read this in December, but I also read it again in January. And it's this book, I can't say enough about it. I actually did a review for Heartberries, and by the time I was done and I went to go click off the stop button for my camera, I realized that I didn't even push record, so I was so frustrated. So I remember on my latest wrap up, I think it was for December, I don't remember. All these months are smashing into each other. I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars, and I feel like every Indigenous memoir, or I'm pretty sure any other memoir that I'm going to read, is gonna be an automatic 5 out of 5 stars. But I feel like I don't think I should be rating memoirs anymore because they are personal experiences, and I'm pretty sure they are all amazing and very, very powerful reads. So I think from now on, I don't think I'm going to be like giving memoirs star reviews anymore. I'm still going to be reviewing the book and then also having my usual discussion on the book that are spoilery, but I don't think I'm going to rate them anymore. So amazing book. I suggest you all pick this up. It's pretty amazing. Okay, so the next book that I read that I basically finished in January, and it took me a while to finish this book because I was actually buddy reading this with a really close friend of mine, and her name is Amber. And we were going through this book chapter by chapter, really talking about what things in this book have really stood out to us, and then also like mildly analyzing like, why is she writing this way, or why is she kind of removing herself sometimes from the chapter. And we had some pretty amazing discussions on it. So I want to thank Amber. Thank you so much, Amber, for reading this book with me. And that book is Carrie by Toni Jensen. And wow, this book is pretty powerful. The whole title of the book is Carrie, a Memoir of Survival on Stolen Land. It's a collection of essays that Toni Jensen put together and created this amazing piece of work. Toni Jensen is Métis. She's a professor. She's a university professor that teaches, I believe, English, writing in that realm. She's picking apart the layers and the complexity of violence that exists in the United States, but also that violence very much has a very strongly, deeply rooted history here with colonization or settler colonization within the United States. So she takes awesome looks at that. Her writing is genius. She picks apart also definitions like within the dictionary, and then she also layers those definitions with experiences of her own, or things that she may have seen, or things that are happening at that time in the place that she's in. And usually the places that she's in, she pays homage to that place by saying, this is the stolen land of such and such indigenous nation. And it's pretty incredible. Her personal experiences very much highlight not only how complex violence is, but how different populations may experience it. So she talks about race, she talks about gun violence, she talks about the complexities of what it means to be privileged and also oppressed, but not throwing it out there and making it really in your face, but she peels back the layers so carefully, and she wonderfully describes how violence has shaped our way of living, but also how it very much erases what is happening to people who experience violence all the time. So not only is there an experience of erasure, but also there's an experience of how the United States has profited off violence. I mean, the United States itself was created from stolen indigenous lands, but also on the backs of so many oppressed populations, especially our Black relatives. This book was so good, and it's very thick. It's very dense. I don't know what else to say, but it's such a good book, and I highly recommend it. It's very awesome. Okay, so content warnings for child abuse, for child neglect, sex trafficking, mentions of violence, mentions of gun violence, mentions of police brutality, and also racism, violence against Black and Indigenous peoples, and also people of color. Now, I'm going to be sharing books that I've read for February, and my February reads were so amazing. So I participated in Jesse's from Bow Ties and Books Blackathon, and I also participated in a couple of book clubs. Next book is the February book for a book club on Bookstagram called Well Read Native, and that book is Too Much Lip by Melissa Lukashenko. So this book is written by an Indigenous Australian author. She is Bunjalung, and what can I say about this book? Wow. The protagonist is a queer character. Her name is Carrie, and she's just this really awesome, complex, strong character, and this book is very much centers around her coming home, and the character is just this very sarcastic, funny person with a very tough exterior. So she returns home because her grandfather is dying, and she returns home to pretty much provide that comfort, because to be there, to be present, either to say goodbye or just to be there while he passes. So it is an amazing story. There is so much packed into this book, like when it comes to Indigenous communities. I don't specifically know a lot about Indigenous communities in Australia, except for what I learned in university, but it also is a really amazing portrait on intergenerational and historical trauma, Indigenous lands, and violence and systemic violence against Indigenous peoples. It doesn't center on it, but it's part of the plot, and how it creates this really interesting dynamic between the group of characters, which are basically all family members. There's also, I think, 1, 2, 3 generations of characters within this book that are family. And then also it amazingly features this person who is having a hard time in her life and pretty much trying to find herself. And it's interesting how she sees the relationship between not only herself but also how she relates to family, and how her family has this connection to land, but also how their histories, even their inner family histories, is so complex. It's full of love, but yet there's this other part that is full of violence and trauma. This book, I think I am gonna just review it because there's so much that I want to share about it. And I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. Content warnings for this book include violence, racism against Indigenous peoples, racism against Black Indigenous peoples, systemic racism, systemic violence against Indigenous peoples, also child abuse, child sexual abuse, and also internal oppression that plays out. So this book starts out pretty strong, and it automatically starts with family history and how that history affects the next generation and so on and so forth. But this is just an amazing read, and I highly recommend it. So thank you, Well Read Native. This book was pretty amazing, and thank you, Melissa Lukashenko. Not only was I angry and sometimes very sad during this book, but there's also times where I just completely laughed out loud. Like I could see these things happening within my own Indigenous community, like little things that have happened, and kind of the relationship that exists between family also. So yes, very good book. Okay, so the next book that I read for February was also a book for book club, and it was for Erin and Dani's book club. Oh wow. So Erin and Dani are Indigenous bookstagrammers, and they both co-founded Erin and Dani's book club. So Erin is her ID on Instagram is Erin's Library, and Dani's Instagram is Thunderbird Woman Reads. So two amazing bookstagrammers and also booktubers. So they came together. they're this amazing Indigenous powerhouse of Indigenous reviewers, but they came together to create Erin and Dani's book club. Their entire book club is focusing on Indigenous memoirs for 2021. So the book that they had for the month of February, or for the month of January, was Blonde Indian. So this was the January book, but we discussed this book in February. The book is called Blonde Indian by Ernestine Hayes, and it's Alaskan Native memoir, and Ernestine is Tlingit. So it was, wow, this book is so amazing. So it's a memoir. I'm not gonna rate it, but if I were to, it would obviously be a 5 out of 5 read. But it talks about an Indigenous woman who begins her journey very, very young, and she shares these really awesome, amazing Indigenous storytelling. So this journey is very much spiritual, it's cultural. She interweaves stories about land and connection to land, but also kinship. She starts out the story very young, but she's also including a fictional story within here. It is genius. It is so amazing. So she, on one hand, she is talking about herself and her experiences in an Indigenous community, being raised by her grandmother, but then she also interweaves a fictional story of another Alaskan Tlingit family. So I don't I don't know how to explain this book, but I feel like this book is another memoir about experiencing Indigenous life and what it was like, especially amongst non-native or white people. I feel like I found myself almost reflected back in this, where I also left the reservation to go to school, but I also had this amazing journey of coming back home and rooting myself in this land. And we always say, I think every Indigenous person out there says or has a saying of having a long umbilical cord, because we're very much connected to home in many ways, not just with family, but also with culture and religion and spirituality, and those types of layers that almost make up the heart, minds, and souls of Indigenous people, and how all those things are connected to land. So I found that to be really awesome. I feel like the descriptions that she uses for the area of Alaska is just amazing. It feels like you're almost there, and I really appreciated that, because I felt not only what kind of foods they ate and what seasons were like, but I also found that she was emotionally connected to this land, and you could really tell in the writing, and you can hear the love there, you can hear the connection there. So I thought this to be a really amazing book, and I'm so happy. I am happy because I got a sticker from Erin's Library, the book club, and I also got a bookmark. So this bookmark is pretty amazing. It has all the reads, as you can see, on here for the entire year. And if you want to participate, you can actually just DM Erin's Library or Erin and Dani's book club or Thunderbird Woman Reads, Dani. All of their stuff is on Instagram, and then you can just go onto their page. And so these are the books right here that Erin and Dani have scheduled for the entire year. It's a pretty cool post, and if you want, you can actually purchase also a little bookmark to keep you like on track. I'm so happy to be a part of Erin and Dani's book club. I've had an amazing experience so far. It's been amazing. Okay, so now I am going to share with you books that I read for Blackathon. Oh, I had such an amazing time with Blackathon. My reads were all excellent and very interesting. I'll get to the interesting part soon enough, but I had a really awesome time reading these books, and it was just completely amazing. So the first book that I read for Blackathon was Kindred by Octavia Butler. Wow. This book, oh my goodness. So the protagonist of this book is Dana, and Dana is a Black woman. She's just about to move into her new apartment with her husband, and her husband is white. Then all of a sudden she gets time sucked back into the early 1800s, and she encounters this little boy drowning in the river, and she saves him. So she has also a very interesting relationship with this little boy, and she has multiple encounters with him. All the while she's staying in that time, and then she jumps back into her own time, which is the 1970s. So she's making these leaps back and forth. Of course, it's a time of slavery, and you can feel the panic and the urgency in this situation. I felt like every time I sat down to read this book, my heart was beating so fast. And this book is amazing because not only does it take a really intimate look at slavery, and the details are so incredible in the times of early 1800s in an area obviously where slavery is very much a part of that time. I don't want to spoil anything more when it comes to this book. This is a definite must read. I highly recommend you guys all check it out. But also, I feel like this book really explores the exploitation and the violence and the oppression that took place in that time, the violent oppression that took place in that time. So I feel like this book takes a very interesting and amazing and incredible look at slavery, and it's just a short span of time that I had with this book, but I feel changed by it. I feel like these types of reads are important because that history is not explored within our education system. So this book was completely amazing. I highly recommend it. I think everyone does. This is a pretty amazing book. So yeah, 5 out of 5 stars. Okay, so the next book that I read for Blackathon fulfilled that first prompt of Black spirituality or Black spiritualism, and it is David Mogo God Hunter by Suyi Davies Okamboa. Wow. Oh, where do I start with this book? This book is unlike any other fantasy read that I've ever read. It was refreshing. It was incredible because I feel like, and I'm so reluctant to call it fantasy because a majority of this book is very cultural, it's spiritual, based on the Yoruba legends and myths, but also within the book, the mythos itself is incredible. Fantasy reads I feel like I've immersed myself in has always been a lot of white characters, a lot of Western settings, a lot of Western mythology, and like when I think of a European or a Western fantasy, I automatically think like a sword or I think of armor, I think of crowns, even the language, it's very, very Westernized. But when I read this book, oh my goodness, even the dialogue, the setting, the environment, the people, the character dynamics, it was just completely amazing. So I really, it took me a while to read this book. I took my time with it because there is Nigerian pidgin dialogue that takes place between the main character and then also kind of like his mentor or his grandfather of sorts. And that dialogue, I would get lost in it a little bit, but then that's what we have YouTube for, right? So I would kind of look up those dialogues and what they would mean. So the majority of the book is easy to understand, But when that dialogue takes place, because sometimes there's a shift in dialogue, sometimes he's just speaking, just like having what we would call a Western conversation, and then all of a sudden when he talks with his grandfather, it's Nigerian pidgin. I guess all I would have to do is read a little bit more, and then I would understand the context of that conversation. But I didn't want to. I wanted to be totally immersed in this book. So I was looking up this phrase means, or what does this mean? And so I would look up those things and I would reread it and I'd be like, oh, okay. There is Yoruba language in this book. So I was looking up Yoruba language. And then finally, this book takes place in Lagos, Nigeria. I was going on YouTube and then just looking at different videos of different parts of Lagos, especially the specific parts that are in this book, because it's very descriptive. It'll describe streets and different neighborhoods. So I was going into YouTube and just looking up those specific locations. And then finally, there was also different languages for maybe the different types of clothing or garments they were wearing. So I was looking those things up. Like, okay, he's wearing something red and blue. Like, that wasn't enough for me. I felt like I wanted to really absorb this book and what was going on and be really immersed in the environment and in the setting in this book. So I would look it up and I'd be like, oh, okay. So I'd have like a better picture in my mind of the characters and what they look like and what they were wearing. The mythos of the gods within this book was just incredible. I mean, to compare it, there's absolutely nothing at this point that I can compare this book to, unless I were to read maybe another Nigerian authored fantasy. I had such an amazing time absorbing and sucking in all of these details. And also, I feel like this book could have been 2 books, but I feel like that was intentional because the character, to see his development, David Mogo is very much this sarcastic, pessimistic person in the beginning of the book. By the end of it, he really comes into his own and creates these really amazing relationships with different characters. And also he finds a connection to this place, this area that he loves so much, the people that he appreciates and the people themselves in this area of Lagos. So I thought that this book was such an amazing fantasy read. I feel like I now am just missing so much. I'm missing so much diversity in fantasy writing and culture, especially a fantasy that is written from a different cultural perspective in different areas in the whole world. So thank you so much, Suyi Davies Akamboa. This was such an amazing book, and wow, I am so glad I read it. I recommend y'all read this. And if I didn't say already, this is a either 4.5 or 5 out of 5 stars. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. Pretty awesome. Okay, so the next book that I read for Blackathon was another Octavia Butler book, and it was Dawn. And this is the first book of the Xenogenesis series, or also the Lilith's Brood series. And this was such a weird read. Definitely science fiction. It fulfilled that prompt. I think it was the 3rd prompt or 2nd prompt of the main character or comes into contact with the alien civilization. Lilith is the main character, and she wakes up, and I thought that the beginning was so interesting to just suddenly wake up and have these distant memories of our Earth apocalypse, and then all of these other really small details that start coming out. So Lilith, she is the protagonist, and then she finds out that basically she has been captured and held captive by an alien species, which is the Oankali. The Oankali want them to continue their life back on Earth and then release them back to Earth. But there are some interesting things that have to happen in order for that to happen. So I don't want to give any more away, because I feel like that part for me was like, what? So I thought that was really that was a really interesting plot. So Lilith is the first to be awakened out of the humans that were, well, not the first, but she's the first human to be chosen and awakened with the intent of having the human population go back to Earth, because they want Lilith to lead in that process of awakening other humans to be released back to Earth. She wakes up in this room, and when I think of this room, I think of like an interrogation jail cell that is very clean and very pristine looking, and she's being fed, but she doesn't know by what. Usually food just ends up there. She's in prison, basically. She's like a captive, and then she keeps thinking of like, what is going on? What am I being held? Who am I being held captive by? But later on, you find out that she's actually being held captive by an alien species. So the book goes on to talk about how the alien species, who are described as the Oankali, have basically saved humanity from themselves. They have taken away the human population, or those who have survived, and kind of put them into a cryosleep environment until they are able to be released back into Earth. And I believe the time span is a huge time span. I don't want to say any more than that, except that this book was really weird. So I just want to put it out there, so content warning for like complexities of non-consensual sexual exploration and experiences, but not okay. How do I talk about this? But there's violence that happens. There's a murder that takes place. There's also, I feel like this book also gave me very confined feelings, like I almost felt a little bit claustrophobic reading parts of these books. But also I feel like this book was a weird read, but also unlike any science fiction that I've read before. So even down to the description of what the alien species looks like, what their kinship and families are like, even when it comes to gender and sexuality, I feel like all of that is very much new, and I haven't read anything like that before. Lilith also has amazing like reasoning and deductive logic, and the way she thinks about the world and her situation. She's a very resilient character. But I also thought that she was pretty awesome in terms of understanding and coming to conclusions of, okay, I can be like this in this crazy circumstance, or I can do this. I feel like it explores humanity, and I feel like it's almost like a take on human society and the behavior of what it means to be human, but also what it means to be a human in a group of people in very stressful situations. And so I thought this book to be very interesting and captivating, but also disturbing on some levels. I didn't know how to rate this book, because I feel like there was parts, like this book as a whole is pretty incredible, but there was parts in there that had me dealing with a lot of conflicted feelings about what is happening. And so I thought that area of conflict within myself was a very interesting journey, and I was so captivated in the characters and in the plot that I just had to keep reading, and it didn't sway me from wanting to finish the book. So I thought that was also very interesting. And I'm still wondering, the book ended on a cliffhanger, and I'm struggling whether or not if I want to continue the series, because I also want to read Wild Seed, which is another sci-fi book by Octavia Butler. So I'm wondering, I was like, should I read this, like continue on with Dawn or Xenogenesis, this Xenogenesis series, or should I start a new series, which is Wild Seed? And I read the synopsis of Wild Seed, and wow, I'm really intrigued. So, okay, this is a wrap up. This is not this is not a TBR video. And I also enjoy the writing. Octavia Butler is such an amazing writer. It reads so easily while exploring very complex emotions and states and characters. Kindred and Dawn, completely different books, but I felt like they were such a breeze to get through. They were very easy for me to understand. So I feel like this book was a really interesting exploration of human behavior and also what it would be like to come into contact with a completely different species that doesn't understand human culture, human society, human behavior, human dynamics and relations, even if you're complete strangers. Also what it means to have boundaries between humans, and then basically looking at the basic survival nature of human beings. So I thought that would be really, really interesting, and I was very much engaged and my eyes wide sometimes my mouth dropping open when I was reading some parts of this book. But like I said, I don't know if I'm going to continue this book or not, and I guess that's something I'm probably going to think on later on, maybe later on in the year. So yeah. Okay, so yeah, these are the books that I have read for January and February, and I had such an amazing time. I feel like I am so grateful for Jessie. Blackathon was such an amazing experience, and I am going to continue to read Black authors throughout the year. I specifically want to read all of Octavia Butler's work, that's for sure. Thank you everyone for watching this video, and I guess you'll just be seeing book reviews from me if I decide to review any of these books. So I shall see you all soon. I hope you are safe, I hope you are well, and I'll see you next time. Bye.